And when you talk to the parents, you realize that it's such a beautiful thing that someone has entrusted you to teach their children.
Mm,
It's a beautiful human concept
mm,
that you are responsible for other people's children. And that makes you as much, maybe even more committed to their success because there's no backup.
right, right.
There's zero backup.
Welcome to the Dad Bod, a podcast that tells the story of what it means to be a dad today, one dad at a time. My name is Sean, and I'm a dad living in New York City with my wife and our two young native New Yorkers. The formula for the Dad Bod is simple. Each episode, we're going to interview one dad to get his story of being a dad. Over time, all of these stories will start to create the bigger story of what it means to be a dad today. Thank you very much to everyone for tuning in. If you like what we're doing with the Dad Bod, share it with your friends and family because these meaningful conversations about fatherhood are a great way to start a meaningful conversation of your own with someone that you care about. This episode is dad number 13 overall and dad number 1 of season 2. I'm ever grateful to be sharing the Dad Bod with you. If you're a first-time listener, I encourage you to listen to all of the dads from season 1 or check out the episode right before this one in your feed where I give tribute to the dads of season 1. For season 2, I'm excited to share that we are starting a weekly email newsletter with the goal of adding new angles to the story of what it means to be a dad today. We're going to have fun trying out new ideas with it, so if you love the Dad Bod, sign up for the newsletter at thedadbodpod.com and tap subscribe. And as always, if you like what we're doing with the Dad Bod, hit that subscribe button in your podcast app and post up a 5-star review. I really appreciate it. So the voice you heard at the beginning of the show belongs to my new friend, fellow dad, and first ever granddad on the show, Mitch. I was introduced to Mitch by Andrew, Dim Sum Dad. A big and special thanks to Andrew for his incredible contributions to the show. After being an early guest as dad number 3, Andrew referred 3 dads to the show. TJ, 7 Habits of Dad. Doug, Pursuit of Happiness Dad. And now Mitch. Like many of you, I'm in my 40s and at this very, very full stage in life. In overwhelming moments, my wife and I often ask each other, what do you think your older self might say to you? The goal of this thought exercise is to access a clear-eyed perspective by looking at oneself from afar via a different moment in time, even if just in one's mind. Well, talking to Mitch was like a supercharged version of that. At 73 years of age, with 2 sons, 6 grandkids, 45 years of marriage, and 2 incredible professional careers worth of experience to draw from, speaking with Mitch felt like being airlifted to his perch in life and looking down at my own. All right, enough talking now. I'm very excited to be sharing this first interview of season 2 of the Dad Bod with you. Mitch, Generational Wisdom of Dad. So introduce yourself. Tell me your name, your age, how long you've been married, how many kids you have, how many grandkids you have, what you do for a career, as well as any other hats that you wear or commitments that you keep that are worth mentioning.
My name is Mitch. I was born in the Bronx, spent my early childhood in Queens, and then went to high school in the town in Long Island that houses Belmont Park, so it's right on the Queens border. I have 2 brothers. My parents were married for 72 years. My dad passed last year, actually, at 101. So my 2 boys were blessed to have a grandfather into their 30s. And we have 6 grandchildren, and 4 of them got to know and spend 3 or 4 holidays with their great grandfather as well as one great grandmother, my wife Sandy's mom. I personally benefit from having my dad available for support and love and advice for 70 years. So we were blessed with enormous amounts of loving family and paternal wisdom throughout our lives. I mentioned my wife, Sandy. We've been married for 45 wonderful years. And she's been pretty much the best parenting partner I could ever have imagined. We fit together pretty well. She and I met as summer interns at a New York advertising agency back in 1974. We have two sons, as I mentioned, aged 39 and 37. And each of those sons now has three children, two older boys and a girl, the same. And the children span the ages of 11 months to 7. I like to call myself the dad of two dads because I'm still a dad, but I'm a dad of a dad, which is provides a perspective and also gives you a perch on which to observe a little bit more than if you're in the fray, 24/7. I grew up in really that idyllic time in America that everyone harkens back to, and it was pretty idyllic. The 50s into the early 60s, at least until JFK's assassination, it really was an idyllic time, and that event served as a tipping point, I think, in just our view of what life was going to be like. Like many boys and girls, I was obsessed with sports during the era of Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Roberto Clemente, Sandy Koufax. Had I only kept some of those baseball cards, because now to go in and buy them, it's a little ineffable. And we had all of those cards, of course, because they were the players of the day. So if you bought a pack of cards, in addition
Crazy.
to that free wad of gum that caused almost instantaneous cavities, you had a chance to get one of the top players. And within about a couple of weeks, you would take a clothespin and connect those cards to the spokes of your bicycle to
Oh,
cause like a motorcycle effect.
yeah.
And the value of those cards, the precipitous decline in that value was probably
Oh
measured
no.
with each revolution of those wheels.
So you put Mickey Mantle into the spokes?
Yeah, well, I don't recall putting Mickey Mantle in, but definitely could have. The card purveyors like Topps, they weren't so savvy at that time. So there were just as many Mickey Mantles and Willie Mays. Now, of course, it's sort of the marketing of scarcity. And, in order to get, you've got to buy a box and all of that type of thing. It was a more innocent time. So if you got Mickey Mantle, you got Mickey Mantle. You may have traded him for, someone said 8 cards of other players, and you might easily have done it thinking that you got the better deal. I went out of state for college and business school, but other than that, I'm a New Yorker through and
Okay.
through.
Okay.
So I guess that would be 67 years as a New Yorker. Incidentally, I was a classmate of George W. Bush, and he actually steered me away from my finance intentions to go into advertising, where he said my personality and sort of ethnic sense of humor would be more appreciated. He also said that it would not be appreciated on Wall Street. And I don't know if he was right because I did go into advertising. I entered the advertising business right at the heart of the Mad Men era. So if you've seen that show or know of it, three martini lunches, yes, they were a reality, which was a
Wow.
huge problem for me because I just had a flesh leg. I didn't have one of those wooden legs that a lot of the advertising people seem to have. It was a really exciting time because it was at that moment in the mid 70s when companies decided they wanted to not only be multinational, in other words, do business in multiple countries, but they wanted to be global. They wanted economies of scale, so they wanted to do similar kinds of things around the world in every market and bring American culture, which the marketers thought, and maybe we all thought was what the world wanted. And
Right.
for a time, that did appear to be true. I'm not sure it's very true right now, but it certainly did it then because it was the expansion of capitalism and advertising's traditionally viewed as the voice of capitalism. So it was really I felt like it was right at the pulse of what was happening on a global basis. And that's the world that my sons were born into.
Got it.
Glamorous. Their daddy was doing very well. He was a high-ranking executive in the world's largest advertising agency, but it was also full of late nights for daddy and tons of travel,
Mm,
particularly as I helped open up these international markets, which included Russia in the late 80s, when they started to open up, at least for a couple of decades before it shut down again. Those are incredibly exciting times. And in retrospect, they were more exciting. You forget about some of the trials and tribulations that happened along the way. So for my boys, from birth until they were preteens, they only knew this daddy, me, to be a successful business leader who did his best to come home when possible, which
mm,
wasn't always possible.
mm.
So that also was kind of like what the television shows at the times were showing, that daddy was daddy, but not necessarily as available as he might have liked to have been. And for me, it was like I was on a TV show without the cameras.
Yeah.
Coming home, I didn't wear that hat
Okay. I was gonna
that you
ask,
take
did you
off
wear
and hang
the
up on the coat rack.
trench coat? Is that
Uh,
was that a
yeah,
fashion?
oh yeah, did have a trench coat.
Okay.
Had to go to Burberry's in London to get the trench coat. Had to go. I mean, I don't even know anyone who didn't do that.
Right, right.
So it's not like,
Do you still wear it? Do you still wear the trench coat?
of course, because you stop growing and then you start realizing when you've been around for decades and decades, you know the fashion pendulum. So you don't throw away those skinny ties. You don't throw away the fat ties. You don't throw away any ties unless they get, in my case, Rayo sauce on them, which happened not infrequently. I mean, I was home a fair amount. We got the kids involved in baseball, basketball, ice hockey, tennis. I guess fairly typical, what we used to call yuppies. Ironically, I played football, lacrosse, rugby, and ran track, and my sons had zero interest in those sports. So I didn't have a lot to offer in terms of prior experience. But when your kids are single digits, you're pretty much better than them at any sport that they choose. And one of the great times of fatherhood is when you actually lose to your kids and don't try to lose and don't
Yeah,
lose on purpose. They
yeah,
actually beat you.
yeah,
And you want to actually tell them
yeah.
that they beat you, but they've
Right.
been beating you for years. So you can't.
Right.
So now I'm expressing that to you. And if my sons ever listen to the podcast, they'll learn that, when they were 8, they were pretty fast, but they weren't that fast.
So just for the record then, when did they beat you?
It took them until 12, 13 because I started to run marathons in my early 30s. That kept me in pretty good shape. I ran 17 marathons. I'm happy that they got to see a couple of the New York City marathons that I ran. That was really at a time when one of the marks of a good dad was how available he would be for activities.
Mm,
In my case, mostly sports activities. Where were you on the weekend? That's why I always thought that the Friday afternoon flights coming into New York and the Monday 6 a.m. flights leaving
yeah.
were all people like me.
Mm-hmm.
People like
Mm-hmm.
me
Yeah.
had to get home,
A lot
had
of
to be
trench
home,
coats.
didn't care. Yeah, yeah, a lot of trench coats. Yeah.
I didn't know that your dad was around until he was more than 100 years old. That's amazing, and it sounds like you guys had a really good relationship. Can you tell me a little bit about the imprint that your dad left on you?
Yeah, he's an amazing man, born in 1921. Both of his parents were deaf, and he was the eldest in the family. So he was literally the translator. You can imagine how non-user friendly for people with handicaps. Even New York City was. And New York City was probably more sophisticated than most. So, because they both went, both my grandparents went to schools for the deaf. So they didn't really interact at all with the hearing world. In fact, when my father told me that his mother, my grandmother, had the opportunity to have one of those transplants, she refused because she said I would lose all of my friends. She
Oh, wow.
literally chose not to hear.
Wow.
And shows you the impact of culture and how strong it was because she was afraid at the age of 40 to go into a world where you didn't
She's never been before.
yeah, where she's never been. That really made a mark on me. And she lived till she was 106.
Wow.
So I knew her well into my 40s.
You must have learned something, must have been shaped by having two grandparents with that disability.
Yeah,
What did you learn about the
yeah.
world and interacting with people from
Well,
that?
I learned how important hands were and expressions because, we intuit so much. Like I'm intuiting from you and you from me. We see each other's body language, our shoulder shrugs, everything, our nodding. And you learn that how complex communication is and how wonderfully complex it is, and all the different ways we have to communicate. You also learn to be more precise in your communications, particularly in that
Mhm.
environment, because you don't want to mislead and you don't want to be misunderstood because it becomes a
Mhm.
permanent. It's I can't call you. There was none of the teletype. I can't call you and say, Grandma, I know I said X, but I really meant what? No, it was
Right.
permanent. And
Right.
when God willing you're a grandparent, you'll know that you hang on every word of your grandchildren, even if they say goo goo gaga. My God, she said goo goo gaga to me, and I'll never forget that. And
Yeah.
everything magnifies much more than with your own children, because again, when you're 24/7 with them, there's too much data uh, to organize. There's just much too much data. So I learned from her the perseverance, and she was a ham. She would tell jokes to everyone she would meet. And she was about 4'10", and she would ask my dad to pick her up and put her on a chair. She was not embarrassed in the least, and she would tell jokes. My father would translate the jokes, and they were kind of funny. I really learned that there are no excuses. You think, well, I'm a little shy. You want to know about being shy. You want to know about barriers and obstacles.
Right.
Those last a lifetime.
Yeah.
Those kinds of memories. When you need a reservoir of, we call it inner strength, maybe, you got to find it somewhere. The reservoir isn't just completely available. You need to look
Right.
for it and find it.
Right.
And I learned that from her, that, the world of no excuses. And also learned that, which I have never practiced once, is take a cold bath every day. Can't, I tell you, can't do it, won't do it.
It's a
But
trend. It's a trend.
I know it's a trend, and it's not a trend for me though.
Yeah, me neither.
I don't have, that polar plunge.
Yeah.
I like to take photos, but that's
Right.
pretty much,
I love reading about it.
yeah, love reading about it, love hearing about it. And one of my daughter-in-laws, she's a polar plunger, but better her than me. Let me just say it
Right.
that way.
So how did she end up doing? How did your grandma end up doing? Was it out of necessity or because by choice?
Yeah, I mean, she's just a very outgoing person by nature. Being born in 1897, yeah, she passed in 2003. An
Wow.
unusual time.
Wow.
McKinley was the president. Not too many people even know President McKinley. So
I mean, she touched 3 centuries.
she touched 3 centuries, and she was so proud of that.
That's amazing.
Her resilience is something that I know my sons really appreciate, and hopefully they impart to their children. That'll
Yeah.
be up to them. I was very happy to see that my four grandsons did get to interact with my dad.
Yeah.
He was lucid till the end, completely lucid till
Wow.
the end, till his body just said, I think it's enough now.
So you've had your dad as a model for you as a man, as a dad, and also as a grandfather.
Right.
So he's, been able to shape these very significant divisions of one's life, one who is, blessed to be able to be a dad and to be a granddad. So
Yeah.
how are you influenced by him in any or all of those different divisions of your life?
Yeah. One of the things he did that I cried about a lot. He was 39. And I would love to go on the weekends for him. He was on a softball team, which was like very typical in that era. One day he hit a grand slam home run, which was like super exciting for me because I really understood what that was. And then he told the manager of the team, he said, that's it. I'm done. I'm never going to top that. And I really got to spend my time a little differently because it's like a 4 or 5 hour thing. And I never forgot that he quit on top,
Wow.
relative in a relative sense on top. He wasn't Babe
Right.
Ruth, but
Right.
he was to me. And, being able to walk away, it really did help inform my own decision to
Mm.
leave the advertising business when in my own retrospection, that I really didn't want my epitaph to say he was pretty good in advertising, even if he was
Right.
excellent in advertising.
Right.
He retired when he was 62. And so for the next 30 years, he worked for food banks in New Jersey. Actually, got to work alongside Bruce Springsteen, who was very big in food banks. My dad met him a few times, no big deal. Really nice guy, strong. That guy is strong. I said, yeah, but his voice, because I don't know about his voice, but he's really strong and really into it. He didn't like come
Yeah.
for the photo op.
Mm.
And those kinds of things also make a little bit of an impression on you.
Yeah.
What do you do when the cameras are off? What do you do
Right.
when people aren't watching? I learned a lot about that, being charitable versus being an altruist. What are you actually doing as opposed to for whom are you doing it? He used to probe me in terms of like, what's most valuable to you? What I realized is the most valuable thing that I have to offer as I was getting older was my time
Yeah.
and how I spent it. He said, because your boys will watch and see how you spend your time. And we can't help but want to be a little like daddy. Maybe they didn't want to play the sports I want to play, but I know that there had to be something of me that my boys would admire and would inspire them. So at the age of 46, at the top of my career, so I didn't hit that grand slam home run, but I guess in a business sense, I was hitting the ball pretty well. That I told my boss that I was going to leave. He asked me for 2 years, and I said, "But it's usually like 2 weeks' notice, isn't it?" I mean, I don't want to sound cliche-ish, but he said, "No, I need 2 years."
Talk a little bit about your advertising career.
Well, I graduated Harvard Business School in 1975. That was a time when, just for perspective, the Dow Jones was in the 500s. Okay, now it's I think 42,000. He's in that mid 70s time, and I was fortunate because the advertising business was not one where a lot of MBAs entered because the glamour of Wall Street was calling. Interestingly enough, my starting salary is $16,000 a year. The Solomon Brothers, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, they were only offering 17. So fortunate for me, you could enter a business that you really wanted to do, as opposed to felt like you had this obligation to do. So again, thanks to George Bush, I entered that advertising world, and I was seen almost immediately as the guy who could understand the client's business. And that gave me a huge leg up because you can explain how the client makes money.
Yeah. And why did you understand the client's business? Was it
Well,
because of your MBA education
yeah,
or something
yeah.
else? Okay.
Basically, because I understood the financial instruments that were used, the capital markets, and the accounting. So I could explain, particularly to the creative people, this is how our client makes money. And then when I saw that this was really helpful, I started to think a little bit more about like what else can I add to this briefing. And I worked on all of the classic kinds of clients from telecommunications to packaged goods, any of the big advertisers, because I was at the largest advertising agency, so we had a lot of big clients. And then I would work with the client. The client loved this because the client at that time, they didn't pay for our time. It was a straight 15% commission on the media that we bought. So the client would want as much of people like me, my time, because they weren't paying for it directly. They were only indirectly paying for it. And that was a big advantage for me because so I would visit the clients and try to understand every aspect of their economic model. And then I would deconstruct it back at the advertising agency for my briefings for the creative people. I could help them understand where the leverage points were in the client's business model.
Got it.
And at those leverage points is where advertising could serve as a lever. So this really galvanized my career. So I only had to spend 3 months putting toner in the copier machine versus most of the people had to spend like the first year. And I would come home, and I was living at home. My mother would say, "Why are your hands blue? You have an MBA. I mean, what did you do?" Like they thought it was punishment. It wasn't punishment. It was their way of making sure that everyone was humble.
Rite of
Because
passage.
like law, like consulting, advertising is a service business. It's not about you, it's about the client. I will say that I took to child rearing and also to teaching of viewing everyone with whom I interacted as a client,
Mm,
which would help me to try to see things from their perspective.
mm,
And I think that makes you a better person. And it definitely makes you a better service provider because you don't try and explain away their problems. Their problems are your problems. I used to go around the world giving lectures for the people in my advertising agency about the lectures were called Do You Feel My Pain? Because if you feel my pain, I'm going to listen to you more intensively
right.
because for clients, advertising is a very intimidating product
Mm,
because it's amorphous. It seems to come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden it's on a storyboard. People who don't look like you because they're in creative fashion always looked a little different. They dressed differently, smoked incessantly. And there you were, 8 people presenting to you saying, this is the greatest idea in the history of advertising. And this poor client was torn between like, I want to be cool. I want the creative people to think that I have good
right.
creative judgment. But at the same time, I got my boss's boss, et cetera, who are going to, I can't have them
I
tell me
can't
like,
carry this. Yeah.
you approve that? Well, like,
Right.
kind of an idiot are you? So helping people through that process, holding their hand literally and figuratively, so that they trusted you. And people like me, if I said, this is worth pursuing, you should buy this, and we can present it as a risk worth taking.
Right.
And they would say, yeah, you're coming with me.
Yeah.
We're gonna present to the top people in the company.
So it
Um,
seems like your reputation was some parts business acumen, but maybe many more parts humanity and empathy
yeah,
and service mindedness.
yeah, and I actually think that I know of no business other than like making steel ingots, pure manufacturing, that isn't that way in every way, shape, or form. And there's something ear splitting about saying I'm a people person, for example. And I always tell people, just don't say it, be it,
Right.
because you can't declare yourself a people person. Only others can declare you a people.
That's right. Right. That's a good
And
point.
and don't try to be a people person. Just be a people person. And she said, well, how do I do that? I say, you close your eyes and use your ears. And when you use your ears, you become a people person because you become a more effective listener. And people, just like our body language communicating now to each other, people respond to effective listeners. And in the client world, again, for advertising, law, consult, what you want at all times is for the client to keep talking
Yeah. Yeah.
because clients don't fire people that they're talking to. They hire them and
Right.
rehire them. Why? Because they believe that you have their best interests at heart. And so the dirty little secret of business is it's not about business, it's about people.
Boy, as I listened to you talk, you were not just successful, it seems like the career was really in harmony with a lot of who you are and a lot of your personal values. Or to put it the other direction, you were able to take a lot of who you are and your personal values and apply them in your career in advertising. And yet you got to a point where you made a decision to make a change. Can you take me through that a little bit?
Yeah, well, you know, being successful is great in one sense, but it's the process that is more fun and exciting of getting there. It's far from Alexander the Great crying because he had no more worlds to conquer. But in a sense, you have to make a decision if you're successful in something as to whether or not you're going to continue to do it to be even more successful and what metric would you be using. And if it's money, you'll never have enough. I mean, not even Elon Musk. Elon Musk is worth 200 some odd $1 billion, and he's suing in Delaware court to get a better pay package for him. So, based on that alone, there's never enough. And for me, I wouldn't say that the business was becoming a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel, but I wasn't growing. I really enjoyed imparting the knowledge that I had gained through the years, but I just felt there was a different context in which I could impart these same skills and learnings that would be more interesting because it would be new. I've been doing that for 23, 24 years, and maybe more meaningful and purposeful for me. As a result of that, when my boss said, give me 2 years, and he said, everyone goes through what you're going through, mid 40s. I got it. I understand. Believe me, I got it. Buy a Mustang. That's what he said. He said, buy a Mustang.
Get it out of your system.
And the reason he said buy a Mustang specifically was because Ford Motor Company was our largest client. And he was like a client guy through and through. He would not say Porsche. He would not say anything. Ferrari, forget. So I leased a Mustang because he hounded me about it because he thought that would sort of change my self-image. And it did a little bit. It made me self-conscious.
Like,
I,
look at
I mean,
me, I'm driving a Mustang.
yeah, it was. I'm definitely not the car that I drive. I wanted to be respectful, so I got a 2-year lease. I think I returned it with about 800 miles on it. So they got a really good deal. But I got a really good deal too because it enabled me to change careers. And my dad was a big part of that. I think because he was such a voracious reader. When you have deaf parents, you communicate with your fingers, but reading you could control. You could do that on your own. He loved the ancient Greeks, and he would just remind me all the time that, remember, Aristotle said the meaning and purpose of life is happiness. And the challenge is to understand that expression, of course, in your life. And the real question becomes like, what is happiness? You can pursue lots of different things that others ascribe. It will make you happy, but only you know you.
It's
And
got
so
to
most,
be your
sorry.
definition. It's got to be
Yeah,
your definition of
right.
happiness.
And it's difficult to know what your definition is because particularly in New York City, where whether we like it or not, we seek the affirmation of others. We're defined by how we perceive others perceiving us, and we can't help it. Even though I'm aware of that, which should make me better. It may make me 5% better, but it doesn't make me 100% better
Yeah.
because I still have to live and survive in the world. And survival includes social survival. So my dad was really helpful. That was his way of saying, just do it.
So you were having the sense that you weren't growing. Did you associate that with being unhappy to some degree? And then did you seek your dad's counsel specifically for this
Yeah,
moment in life?
it's a good question. It's a little bit of chicken or egg. He knew that I was frustrated because I was making more and more money. He knew at the end of the day, it was just one day what's in the envelope. We used to call it what's in the envelope, the bonus. So you're happy or sad for about an hour. And with auto deposit, even then we had auto deposit. So you didn't actually touch the money. And so it was fleeting. If it wasn't fleeting, then good for you, because that was still a great motivator. And you wanted to beat last year, and next year you want to beat this year, and all of that. But if it was fleeting, you need to look in the mirror every once in a while and actually just stop combing your hair and just see what you see. I spoke with my wife a lot about it. She knew, because she knew I would. You know how when you live with someone, they see you so much better than you see yourself, and they see the changes that are more obvious, like I'm sure everyone still has the Sunday night, Monday morning doldrums, and
Sunday scaries, as we call them.
oh, yeah, I like it. We didn't call it that. We just, when Walt Disney came on at 8 o'clock at night, that was the beginning of the end of the fun.
Ah,
And I still remember that. Oh, Wonderful World of Disney. I can't wait to watch the show. But at the end, and she could see that was creeping in like Saturday. It's just like, oh, the idea of going to work. When I was at work, I was fine, but I really wasn't fine.
hmm,
Uh, and sometimes you have to be honest with yourself. I mean, it should be all the time, but sometimes you have to call yourself on it. You kind of live in two worlds, like what you know to be right and what you're doing, and there's always a gap between the two. Like, we always can see outside of ourselves,
yeah.
but for the most part, people try and swat that away. And when it's too big to swat away, you have to face it. I'm not sure if I had said this out loud in 1998 that I would have done the same thing, but I took a 96% pay cut. And if you want something that can make you humble in a capitalist world, that can do it. But also, it demonstrated to myself the deepness of my convictions,
Hmm. Yeah,
right? I mean, sometimes you
right.
need empirical evidence. That's as empirical as you want. Like every 2 weeks, you get reminded. I'm hardly complaining about that, because the last couple of years at the company were really enabled me to provide for myself and my family. You can be selfish, but when you have obligations, you have to have a perspective and say, treat yourself as one of your stakeholders, but not your only stakeholder. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I did that pretty well, to be able to provide in the event of dot dot dot.
Yeah.
And I guess I could have gone back in the advertising, but I couldn't ever have imagined going back.
So there was that moment of truth for you, right? Where you told your boss that you were gonna leave. You were
Yeah.
done.
And he wasn't surprised.
Yeah.
I'm still very friendly with him to this day. We had breakfast last month. He's well into his 80s, and he's a fantastic man with his own incredible story. He actually helped me prepare. So that's when I knew that I was not just doing a good job, but I was making an impact in ways that were not measurable. So his helping me do it from a financial standpoint, because when you're living your own fantasy, sometimes you don't think about practical things until it's like sometimes a little too late, or you have to play catch up. He helped me prepare a lot for that,
So he
and
prepared by making sure you were well compensated or by
yeah, by
illuminating your situation to you?
well, he knew something that I didn't know, because only he knew. He was the CEO, and he hadn't yet shared the fact that he was going to be taking the company public. And but he didn't tell me, and at the time he just said, "Give me 2 years." And so afterwards I said, "So that's why you said years instead of weeks." And he says, "You should thank me." But so that enabled me to have a better much better preparation. So he did me a solid in certainly in the personal wealth sense. But nevertheless, I started 2 months after 9/11, which was the final catalyst. I wasn't asking for another catalyst, and that was a rough one for all of us,
Yeah.
horrible one. But out of that tragedy, I it just reminded me of the rightness of what I was about to do, which was to go into the New York City public school system, working in the Bronx. And as it turned out, because I at the time was on the board of Teach for America, so I had a lot of access to different people in the education world, and met with the chancellor of New York City public schools. And I said, I'm doing this. Tell me what you need. He said, we need men teaching math in middle schools in the Bronx. And I said, okay, I'm the
Wow.
man.
That's like the fire right there.
And he said, that's what we need. So that's how I started. I moved to a high school 5 years later, but that's where I started. And it was just a few blocks from where both of my parents grew up,
Wow.
which is an amazing full circle. You don't realize driving past where they lived every day on the way to work. For the first 6 years, I took the subway. It was really amazing. Every time I would just pass by Boston Post Road and just say, so that's where he was, and that's where she was. And I don't even know how she got any sleep because her apartment building was right over. It was on Southern Boulevard and Boston Post Road, were major subway, and those, the elevated subways really
They're
shook
noisy.
the apartments. They're noisy and they shook the apartments. But when they asked me to come back to the advertising agency to kind of give my reflections, it was an amazing thing to trade in the Concorde for the subway, the Four Seasons for peanut butter and jelly in a cafeteria.
Well, were there any moments in the early days where you looked back at all? Any moments of, flinching regret?
Yeah, I went into the schools through a program that we developed at Teach for America. Teach for America generally is recent college grads who have all this intellect and energy to offer the schools, but don't know anything about life
Yeah.
because they're 22, 23 years
All
old.
right.
We had this alternate program we called the New Teacher Project, which was for people like me, 15 plus years out, who maybe didn't have the intellectual energy or the physical energy and rigor, but had some wisdom from life. And we thought that combination, because the schools needed so many
Mhm.
human resources at the time. So I told Wendy Kopp, who's the founder of Teach for America, I said, I'm going to be leaving the board because I'm jumping into the New Teacher Project. So the first regret was, once you enter that program, they don't care who you are. We're talking about under-resourced schools. They needed the bodies, and if the bodies turned out to be good, it was great.
Yeah.
So starting out, I had to be in the school all day teaching, and then at night take the D train to City College to get my master's in mathematics.
Wow.
So, because you needed that degree. I will give you advice and implore you, do not take calculus when you're 50 years old. Do not take it. I mean, maybe never take it, but definitely don't take it when you're fit, because the kids in my class, I mean, there were only a couple of us in the program. So the kids in the class, there were 20, 21. Their minds could receive calculus.
Right.
My mind rejected it. It was like a foreign organism. But you slog through it because you're thinking of the goal. You think
The
of, but
mission. Yeah.
but when I was still getting home the same time at night, like 9 o'clock at night, as when I was in the advertising business, but at 4% of the compensation. You For me, I just had to laugh at myself
Yeah.
because I really, and my wife, she would join, we would be laughing because look, I'm really doing it.
Right.
I cut those cords, because it's really important to not look back. So I have to make this work. This
Yeah.
was my plan B.
Yeah.
So plan A is over. There's no plan C. So plan B has to work.
I want to get this perspective from this period of your life where you made this big change because I'm 42 years old. I have, obviously very different facts in my life from your life, but a lot of the same feelings and themes that you've highlighted about your life and specifically your career life at this point when you were in your 40s definitely resonates with me. And so you've made this leap into teaching. You are living out your convictions. What did that feel like taking home this 4% of your former paycheck, working the same hours, much less sort of admiration from certainly respect, I'm guessing you received as a person who's contributing their part, but you weren't the C-suite executive in the room by any means. But what did it feel like doing this?
Yeah, you learn a lot about yourself when people don't know who you are and don't care. And I think there are a lot of people who can't live with that. If you've had success, it's hard to live with that. He says, but don't you know who I am? No, I don't. And I don't care. So for me, it just continued to provide proof that my instincts were right. And it just every time I was felt humiliated in a classroom, it just deepened my convictions because I knew that if I stuck it out, this guy, this white guy who's showing up, like who is this guy? That the only way to conquer the challenge of proving my worth to a whole different constituency. My school, when I switched to high school, my school had three Caucasian students.
Wow.
This is South Bronx. It was the poorest congressional district in the United States. It's about 10% Asian, South Asian, and the balance, what we call black and brown children. And the only way I could prove my worth to them is by adding value to their lives. It was the only way. So the vehicle was math, but math really wasn't what I was serving because that's not my nature. Of course, I had to teach the test, but teaching to the test is a lot easier than I think people realize. The question is, can you teach to the need?
Mm.
And early on, my sons were the same age as my students, so I had more children. I had hundreds more, as a matter of fact. So among the things that I realized was I was a pretty good math teacher. I mean, I love math. I love when people have that moment. You can see it in a student's eyes that they get it. They don't say it, but you don't need it because you can feel it. And it's the most you just want to hug them. There's no better feeling. And I constantly reminded myself when I started to feel because the kids, they wouldn't always pay attention. We're talking about teenagers. Their job is to not pay attention.
They
I
seem
mean,
to be designed.
they're compensated in life credits to not pay attention, to not listen, so to be rebellious, and it just furthered my need to figure things out, and I need to figure out on my terms, not in theory, because I'm 35 years older than these kids, and to the end, I was 50 years older. So among the early things that I did, as soon as I went to the high school, teaching pre-calculus, I realized the school didn't have a college office. And 85% of the students would be first generation to college in their family. And so I told the principal, I said, you got to get another math teacher, which is I'll help you do, which I did. And I'm going to create a college office for the school. And, that sense of entrepreneuring, I mean, this I knew how to do. If, just leave me. I don't need any resource. The only resource I need is myself. And then I will go out and bring resources to bear as I know how to do that. And I know how to do it well. So created a college office that was really, really successful for the school. I also knew from my marketing background, in the end of the day, these students were my clients, and I understood what their needs were at one level. And the level I'm talking about is I want to be someone in this world. I want to be someone in this world who matters, who people see, that
Mhm.
it now feels like a overused expression, but to be seen, if you're not seen or if you're not heard, it's not overused. It's
Mm.
it's a
Yeah.
it's a huge gap, and it's one that can be closed. And helping them close it, one of the ways to help them close it is by providing access and giving them the skills to be successful in college.
So how did you communicate this and I guess firstly even identify this and even help them to identify this need in themselves? I don't think anybody at any age, let alone a teenager, necessarily knows, hey, the need of my soul, all of my longings, at
Right.
the root of it is this deep, deep need to be seen.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you don't come out and say that exactly.
Right. Right.
How do you connect with them on this very
Yeah.
important thing? That's not math. That's not a test.
Yeah. It's not so simple, but when you have the role of a college advisor, and I was also the academic dean of the school, so that enabled me to go into all the records for any student at any time. If you're reasonably good with data, you glean a lot of insights from the numbers and also looking at the zip codes where they were coming from. And then you talk to the parents, which required me to hire a colleague who could speak Spanish. And when you talk to the parents, you realize that it's such a beautiful thing that someone has entrusted you to teach their children.
Mm,
It's a beautiful human concept
mm,
that you are responsible for other people's children. And that makes you as much, maybe even more committed to their success because there's no backup.
right, right.
There's zero backup. I was really doing the same kinds of human communications that I was doing in the advertising business, and that was to gain trust.
Yeah,
And if you
yeah.
gain trust, this is in all truth. I had dads who gave me permission to hit their kids, boys. I mean, like I ever would, but that was their way of,
Right.
in their
Yeah,
gruff way of complimenting me and saying, "I trust you." Right? I
yeah,
understood what they were saying.
yeah,
So if I said, I think that their world prospects could and would be brighter if they embarked on this path. That would take them away from home in many cases.
yeah,
That's not a 20-minute email. That's hours of conversation. And I was
yeah.
willing to put in the time. I was already used to working these hours. It wasn't like it was but you don't fatigue when you're
Hmm.
talking to a new parent
Yeah,
because for them, it's not their problem. You've been talking nonstop for 9 hours.
right, right.
Uh, it's not that it's that burden is on you. This is what you signed up for. And this is what enabled me to become successful because I showed up every day. I returned every email. I
Yeah,
responded to every phone call. And reliability is sometimes we take it for granted or we think it's an administrative task. It ain't.
yeah,
It's a human need because that's what enables you to have the credibility to do the more sophisticated stuff.
when you try to draw a line to your deepest values and deepest convictions to this commitment to and frankly, skill at building trust. Where does it come from in terms of your values and how you view things philosophically? Where does it come
Yeah.
from?
I do think there's a family based component to it. My grandmother would always say, she would sign it, but make me repeat it. You're not special. Don't take yourself so seriously. When I
Mm,
was like, and you know, you don't always want to hear you're not special, but to be told you're not special by people who treat you in a special way, like your whole life, really resonates. And not taking yourself seriously, I think I'm blessed with a reasonably good sense of humor, and I can laugh at myself pretty well, which enables me to not take myself so seriously. I mean, what's the denominator number of people on the planet? We're not significant enough to treat ourselves more seriously. And I wish more people recognize that. It enables people to get comfortable with you faster.
yeah.
You know that in high schools, particularly in New York City, the kids always gravitate to the kids who appear not to be doing any homework and not to care because
Right.
they're so chill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody loves the surfer dude. There's no one
Right.
who doesn't like the surfer dude.
Right. Right.
And the reason is because you wish you could be someone who didn't care
Yeah.
so that you could be yourself, which is kind of like so ironic.
Right. Right. I love
But
this.
nevertheless, it's still elusive. And I see it with
Yeah.
I saw it in the private schools my sons went to, like the kids who like hung out on the couch and
Hmm.
clearly they forgot to go to class. God, I want to be her friend. I want to be
Yeah.
his friend. It's really, it's the ultimate paradox in some ways.
I never thought about that. That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
But it gives them huge sway,
Right. Yeah.
huge power,
Yeah.
which they don't always use productively because that's how
They
they
don't
got treated
care.
with surfer dude. But if you care and you can approach that point
Yeah.
by having perspective about yourself,
Right. Right. Right.
you can get, you know, reasonably close to be a productive member of society. And I do think gaining trust and getting that credibility comes a lot from not thinking that you're special at all
Yeah. Yeah.
and really being earnest and honest.
Yeah.
Like your daughter is going to be applying to Dartmouth. Her
Yeah.
chances of admission are one in a lot. But the fact that I'm suggesting that she apply to a school like this, which is 250 miles away, the fact that I am telling you
Yeah.
point blank, because I know that she is a legitimate candidate for this
Yeah.
school, is a compliment to you and, of course, to her.
Yeah.
And it is. It's not BS. I mean, it could sound like to someone is, oh, that's a marketing job. Life is a marketing job.
Mm.
Life is a marketing job. Trying to get your kids to do something that they are reluctant to do.
It's a
It's
marketing
called
job.
marketing.
Yeah.
We don't call it marketing, but isn't that what it is?
Yeah.
It's providing incentives by giving them the benefit of doing.
Yeah.
In this case, talking to a family about that their child, of course, this wasn't true for every student, not in the South Bronx, but for that 25% who were legitimate candidates for almost any school in the country. And then letting that set and saying in different ways and changing the trajectory forever of your family. Forever.
Yeah.
Forever is a very long time.
Yeah.
After a successful meeting, which just meant that they would sign the application.
Hmm.
They didn't have to do anything, but they did have to sign the application. That for me, those moments would always make me feel like, why did I wait so long to get into this world?
Uh,
As
yeah.
opposed to
Yeah.
what did I ever have second thoughts?
Right.
And I think I
Right.
needed this because I would not have understood the idea of a child and family as a client other than a concept, as opposed to a way to conduct my entire professional life.
Right. It's simultaneously, why did I wait so long for this? And how could I be doing it this way and this well and with this level of conviction if I didn't have
Right.
that first life.
Yeah. The most important lesson that I tried to instill in my students, and I did the same with my colleagues on the board of directors, was the difference between adapting and assimilating. And what I tried to help students understand is when you go away to college, you're going to be under this huge amount of pressure to fit in. I mean, who doesn't? I mean, that's the role of an older teenager or maybe of anyone, right? To feel like you belong. And they confuse that with what they think that they're the ones who have to change completely.
Mm. Mm.
They have to conform. They
Mm.
have to smoke this, they have to drink that, whatever it is. They have to take this kind of course. They have to do these things on holidays and things they can't do. The challenge is to get them to understand that the college wants them
Yeah.
as they are. There's a need to adapt because whenever you're in a new environment, that's a really important life skill. But they don't want you to compromise your identity and forget who you are. I said, when you come back home for visits, if your friends say, ooh, you've changed, then you've changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that'll be your own guardrails
Right.
because your friends don't BS you. And it's the same no matter what situation you are. If you're accepted into something, recognizing that part of the reason that you've been invited are
Yeah.
your differences, not
Yeah.
not the similarities. I thought that was an important distinction, so much so that I created a course for the high school seniors called Shit You Should Know If You're Going to Leave the South Bronx. I called the course assimilation because it didn't really look good with that word. And I called it assimilation as my own irony, sort of like flipping all the cards over. I said, the whole purpose of this course is to not assimilate, but I
were,
just
were you in marketing or something before?
no, never. I
Oh.
never even heard of it. Um, because there are things that are important to be aware of, like table settings. I'm talking about basic stuff to learning what small talk is and what the topics are about, to terms like real estate, like what is that? Because
Yeah.
kids are going to be talking about it like all the
Right.
time. And you want to be able to participate. You don't have to lead conversations to feel like you belong.
When we talked several weeks ago, just getting to know each other a little bit, was that you highlighted your marriage as potentially the greatest success of your life. And I wanted to hear more about that. How were you and your wife able to be so successful together in marriage?
Yeah, well, 45 years is a long time to be married. So I'm 73. Consider that the vast majority of my life. We had children 5 or 6 years after we were married, and I think that that was helpful. That was the beginning of that phase in the American culture when women were having children a little bit later. And I think, really getting to know someone, even though we live together, it ain't the same. Once you sign that document, oh my goodness, maybe it's the wedding. Whatever it is, it's like really different. And I'm sure you can attest. And starting to see that this is going to be like forever. And so we need to learn so much about what maybe I'll call the nonverbal aspects of a marriage, the routines, the things that it's as much what you don't talk about as what you do. You talk about finances, you talk about who's going to do this, the dissemination of all the tasks that a family has, that you realize how much more fun it was to live in a dorm when all you did was nothing. So, being in a truly, talk about committed relationship, opened your eyes to the idea of sharing. You share with your brothers, but you always had these adjudicants called parents. And, without them, you can't ask your parents. You say, she wants me to do the dishes and I want, no, you don't. All of this stuff. And it's the little things that I think make the biggest difference because the big things are the big things.
Mhm.
They don't linger. If you don't have enough money, if you don't have, it's sort of obvious, you need to address it. It's
Hmm.
the little things. A friend of mine used to refer to it as the pebble in the shoe. Yeah, the
Mm.
pebble, there's a pebble in your shoe. You don't really notice it. You can kind of get by, but it never goes away
Yeah.
unless you take it out
Right.
and it cuts your foot. You get infected. Lots of horrible things can happen because that tiny little speck of sand you didn't address. And the more it's learned non-verbally, so you don't have to like call attention to things, like
Mm.
the better. And that requires observation.
Mm.
Like if you don't put the cap on the toothpaste like
Hmm.
correctly, it's always this like it's hard to keep saying something bothers you. It's like because then you sound like some sort of nut.
Right.
Uh, and then whenever possible, putting a magnifying glass on it and laughing
Yeah. Yeah. I love
and
this.
turning something irksome into a quirky, funny thing
Yeah.
because it makes you realize that just because you're noticing these things about someone else doesn't mean you don't have them.
Right. 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 Right.
In fact, it likely means you have at least as many. So we go from being like, God, why am I so perfect? And I just notice all of these things to, hmm, maybe that's the wrong starting point.
Right.
The
Right.
right starting point is how many little things, and they do accumulate, but they don't aggregate. So you don't have like 37 quirky
Mm.
things become one
Mm.
blob.
Mm.
No, they're all 37 finite individual things.
Yeah.
And if you can't laugh at them, if you need to discuss them, I think we found that it becomes a problem because
I see.
then you think about it afterwards.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so if the two of us are married and we're
Yeah.
doing, and you keep bringing these things up, you may think that, we've resolved them
Uh-huh.
because you surfaced it. And I'm now watching how I put the cap on, but it's lingering with me.
Right. Every time you put the cap on correctly, you're thinking about
Yeah.
me and
Yeah. And
how
how,
disappointed I am that you
yeah.
didn't do that before.
And then you go into either I'm not good enough or I resent
Mm.
this.
Mm.
I,
Got
who does
it.
he think he is?
Yeah.
There's so much balance that's required in a relationship.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that I took a course in Hinduism and one in Buddhism in college because you don't really understand the concept of balance until you've really thought about that as a philosophy of life.
Yeah.
And it's helpful. It's a helpful construct. Starting with sort of inaction as opposed to action
Yeah.
is really, really helpful. I think the goal of a marriage in many ways is to build capacity for all of this stuff, because it never goes away. It just transforms into, it's just like a morphing process. It goes into something else.
Right. Right.
So, it used to annoy me when you use toothpicks. Now that you use floss, it's even more annoying. It,
Yeah.
it's, I don't have a fixation on teeth, but it sounds like I might. Um, the idea of building capacity is so important
Mm.
in a relationship,
Hmm.
so that you have the housing for more stuff as it comes along, and that stuff begins to include health. So the secret is growing old so that you're building capacity for every step of the way.
Right.
So if the secret to any relationship, and marriage is probably the most central, is building capacity for the other, because that will build capacity for yourself. Just the act of doing it, because in a sense, it's an act of generosity
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
overlook things
Yeah.
or to accept.
Or to
And
think about how to address it without addressing it.
yeah, how can I accommodate
Hmm.
without it being a big deal?
Right.
Because things do get magnified. Even, your relationship is deeper and deeper and it's decades and decades, things get magnified. And I think to the extent that you can remove the magnification, you can say, all right, there's always going to be a pebble, but it's going to stay a pebble. And if it becomes something that needs to be addressed, it means it's not a pebble anymore. It's a
Right.
boulder, and
Right.
boulders we know we have to address,
Yeah.
and we do.
Right. You have to.
I hope that that's helpful for
This is
your.
super helpful. I mean, just for me personally, this is really, really practical wisdom that you just gave. Because I think that so often it's said like you should be honest. And I think that people have a picture of honesty like, Mitch, I hate it when you're a jerk,
Right,
which is
right,
basically every time you mess up the toothpaste.
right,
And it's like, well, that was honest.
right.
And it's honestly not exactly going to help my
Yeah,
capacity
I
or your capacity.
right. I think therapists have a difficult time telling you that restraint is because it doesn't sound like they're earning their keep.
Right.
But restraint is a critical human trait
Yeah.
and hard to practice
Yeah.
because we always think that we know and others don't. And we should know that we don't know any more than anyone else.
Thank you, Mitch. This has been really excellent. I really, really appreciate you giving me your valuable time.
And on behalf of everyone with whom you've conversed, thank you for letting us discover things about ourselves that were latent, that when they come to the surface, there's these aha moments that happen during our conversations, and they're extremely valuable. And at my age, they're precious.
The pleasure has been mine. It's been a real gift to be able to sit with dads like yourself and now the first granddad ever on the show. Thank you so much, Mitch. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks to your wife for basically reading you the riot act and saying, just do it.
Okay, dad number 13 of the Dad Bod is in the books. Big thanks to Mitch for sharing his story and to Andrew for referring Mitch. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it brought a little something positive to your day. Hit that subscribe button, post a 5-star review, and go to thedadbodpod.com to sign up for the brand new Dad Bod email newsletter. Thanks again for listening.